Hello again. Welcome to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these fireside chat episodes, I sit down with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. My guest today is Brandon Amoroso. Brandon, very excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Brandon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SCALIS. Prior to this, I started a Shopify plus marketing agency while I was going to school out in LA at USC back in 2018. I grew that team to just over 50 full-time team members and a successful exit in 2022. And it was out of the pain points that I had hiring and recruiting for that organization, combined with my younger brother's pain points as a job seeker in the market, that we decided to actually start SCALIS.
I love that. I think some of the best products and services are obviously built out of your own story, your own need. So you're co-founder of SCALIS, very interesting recruiting ATS platform. Obviously not your first venture. You just you talked about what you did prior. As a fellow founder, I'm always super interested in what that kind of journey looks like for others. I want to hear about that. You talked about the pain points, right? So tell me a little bit about what that was that sort of led up to SCALIS. What were, if you had to articulate some of those pain points to talk about it and what SCALIS actually solves, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so we got up to about 15 full-time team members, primarily through referrals. And then that's about the point where the referrals were not bringing in enough volume in order for us to sort of meet our hiring needs and goals. And so at that point, we went external. And we basically had two options, job board advertising or recruitment agencies. And, the recruiting agencies were a little bit too rich for my blood at the time, with the 20 to 30%, first year of salary commitments. And the job boards is what we were left with. And we used an ATS as well. So pretty much the way our flow worked is we post a job, we get all these applicants. I was spending a bunch of money on LinkedIn advertising to get those applicants, and maybe 5% of them had ever even logged into Shopify before, which was quite literally the only criteria that we were looking for. And we did that for, the 4 years that we were growing and scaling that company. And we hired for really only 2 or 3 different positions. And so I thought, using the same platforms, that there would have been some sort of improvement or optimization of the types of candidates getting brought in, but that never occurred. It was always just the same over and over again, thousands of applicants, maybe 5 to 10% of them having logged into Shopify. So there's a lot of manual work that we had to do on our end to actually get to the 5% that mattered, and obviously a bunch of wasted time and money in that process. My younger brother was getting recommendations from these job board platforms and sourcing tools out there to go be the air traffic controller at the Dallas airport, or a part-time women's shoes associate at a Macy's in New Jersey. Things that made zero sense in any way whatsoever. And any person in the world who looked at his resume and background would never have possibly come to those two as the recommendations that he should be applying to. And so when we took his experience and overlaid it on mine, we decided to go solve the root of the problem, which is the recommendations themselves. Why are all these platforms so bad at matching the right candidates to the right open roles and vice versa, despite there being an immense amount of data out there and also shared in any given application process? And what we uncovered is that the biggest gap is that to take candidates from sourcing all the way to offer letter signed, there's usually 3 to 7 different third-party platforms that an organization would have to use to facilitate that process. And so beyond it just being really expensive and cumbersome for both the employers and the candidates alike, there's data loss throughout that whole process. And there's no feedback loop going into the sourcing tools. So when I was hiring for those Shopify developers, as soon as they clicked apply on LinkedIn, they had no idea if they even submitted their application to the ATS, let alone if they were qualified or not, which round of the interview process they made it to, what were we ranking them on our scorecards, what was the AI interview note taker picking up during the call, what are they scoring on their skills assessment tests, if we did reject them, why did we reject them, were they a silver or bronze medal candidate, on and on and on. There's an immense amount of data that lives downstream that gets trapped there and dies there, and there's no feedback loop into sourcing. So that's why there was never any improvement, because you need reinforcement learning to be able to improve machine learning algorithms over time.
Wow. I mean, that sounds pretty incredible. So you're able to now sort of synthesize that all sort of one in one component. You take folks from that sourcing all the way through offer letter signed, and you work with your brother at the same time, apparently.
Yes, he
What's
runs
it like
the
working with family? Say it again.
he runs the product and engineering team, and
Okay.
I'm all go to market, general business stuff, and the CEO responsibilities, if you want to phrase it that way, the fundraising, events, etc. And so having that delineation of responsibilities makes it very easy. And we're also very different. So I would never want to be in the engineering sprints and tickets and working with the Figma files in the way that he is. And
Yeah.
he also would never want to be at 60 plus dinner events a year, going to conferences, dealing with fundraising,
Yeah.
sales, etc. So
That's
that
fair.
delineation has worked well.
What? Tell me about the name. Where did the name come from? Is it a family thing?
It was originally ladder, so you're like climbing the corporate ladder was what we were trying to invoke. There's a lot of businesses with that name, as you can imagine. So SCALIS is ladder in Latin, and it sounded kind of big techy. If you think about like Slack or some of
Yeah.
these other names that really had no meaning in any way whatsoever until
Yeah.
they did. Um, and then we ended up incorporating the ladder into the A of the logo. So he came up with that, and then I came up with our tagline, which is "Hiring shouldn't suck." So we got that trademarked, and that's all of our dinner events that we run. They're the "Hiring shouldn't suck" dinner events, which we've
Yeah.
done about 40 this year, and at some point next year we'll start doing some sort of fun out of home activations, playing off of that.
You've told me about a little bit about those. That's I think a really really smart marketing tool. And now I fully understand the logo that is on your hat right now. So I appreciate that. Um, Tell me about the kind of organizations that Scalus is best suited for. Are there certain kinds of use cases that you see getting more benefit from your platform than others?
Yeah, so I mean, our 10-year vision is to be everything for everyone in the same way that an Indeed, a LinkedIn is. But obviously, we won't get to that point by starting out as being everything for everyone. So we really subdivided it into three categories, like SMB, mid market, and enterprise, and try to determine which one made the most sense for us to approach first. When we looked at SMBs, we're a great value and use case for them, but the contract sizes are smaller and the amount of data that they're putting into the system is not as exciting from a training perspective in terms of
Right.
like a cross platform. So the way that we get those types of businesses on is through our partner program. We have about 47 fractional talent consultants and recruiters signed to our partner program. They work with a ton of SMBs, think under 100 employees who are just getting started with recruiting, and they look to them for the recommendations. And so we've gone that approach for SMB, not doing like direct outreach necessarily to that group because it's harder to identify need at that stage. With the mid market organizations, they are the sweet spot because the budgets are higher and the amount of data that they're processing is greater. I mean, they're going to be hiring at least 25 to 100 at a minimum roles per year, and they also have a willingness to move that is greater than the enterprise. So we're primarily targeting mid-market organizations that are on some of these legacy ATS providers. More often than not, they're using anywhere between 2 to 5 extra third-party tools outside of just their ATS to facilitate what Scalus does in one place. So our whole value prop for them is you're throwing everything out, consolidating into one. And a lot of C-levels are asking their teams to do more with less. And so Scalus is a perfect fit for those
Why
companies.
are they willing to move more than the enterprise?
The enterprise internal decision making, sort of flows are just longer, more cumbersome. It's not as clear what the approval flow actually is in some of those organizations. And more often than not, they're stuck on much longer term contracts. So I've even seen 5-year contracts at some of the enterprise organizations. And the systems that they're on are also a lot more difficult to use and not as friendly when it comes to like data migration. And
Okay.
so, more often than not, that really is where the rubber meets the road. Is A, like the contract might not end for quite literally another 4 or 5 years, and then B, not having the time on our end to be able to work through that year and a half sales cycle through all the different stakeholders and whatnot. Um, and then three, the actual ability to migrate the data cleanly into a solution like SCALIS. So we have a lot of those relationships, nurturing. They'll come to our dinner events and whatnot, but it's not our core ICP at this
Yeah.
point.
I want to hear more about the story that brought you into that HR tech space, coming from, Shopify. Tell me about some of the different challenges that you had to, that you went through, that you experienced that were different from, what you had before. Specifically, I guess, getting into recruiting, applicant tracking, right? A lot of different pieces of technology, right? A lot of different challenges that you're having to now overcome. What was that journey like, and what were some of the biggest differences?
Yeah, so I mean, I learned a lot building the first business, though it did have a couple of key distinctions. It was a services organization, so it was very much so a people business, and we were also profitable from day one. Um, and second is totally different ecosystem. So that was Shopify. This is more general HR and recruiting tech. But to the first part, being the people business, still a people component within SCALIS. There's just different. It's not the same where I'm adding a head and then expecting a certain revenue amount to like come in via that. So the financial modeling and whatnot is a little bit more challenging with a SaaS organization, especially pre-profitability. And then second, as it relates to like the network, I had a pretty sizable Shopify network towards the end of that, but you know, could have gone the route of starting a business in that ecosystem and would have already been tapped in a way that I wasn't within recruiting, but took a lot of the learnings and lessons that I gathered while building that Shopify network to sort of like 10x it when it comes to the recruiting landscape. So that was a top of mind for me as soon as we started this, to just try and get in front of and get connected with as many recruiting leaders as humanly possible. And so what that looked like to begin with was actually hiring them internally. So like a big thing for me was I brought the SMB owner experience to hiring and recruiting, but I wasn't a VP of talent at a organization with a team of 20 recruiters hiring 100 roles a month across the globe. They obviously bring insights and experience that I do not have in any way whatsoever, especially as it relates to like the day-to-day workflows and the pain points that exist in the tools that they're using. So our VP of product was the director of recruiting and people ops at Greenhouse and Workday shops for the last 10 years prior to joining SCALIS. And then we surrounded her with a group of 9 super user advisors from, Gem, Ashby, Lever, Greenhouse, Team Taylor, Workable, sort of the core solutions that you would expect to see when you think of ATS in the market. And that was really critical for me, not only to get more sort of networking and awareness exposure, but most importantly, having the actual practitioners build the product, because I was definitely not the right person to, build the day-to-day workflows of what a recruiting team would want and need in an end-to-end AI native solution. So that plus, the learnings I had from building network in the Shopify ecosystem is how we're able to, now have all these partners in our partner program, how I can have a dinner event in pretty much any city and know without a doubt we'll have at least, a 10 attendees there. It's just sort of been like brute force, knocking on as many doors as humanly possible over the past 2 years, pre us actually going live, to make sure that we're a known commodity, and it's something that, we're still very focused on.
That's amazing, and that's really creative and clever. I think way to go about building your team. I like what you said about how we had the actual HR, or you had the actual HR practitioners building the product, which is not. I mean, not traditionally how it's done, and probably one of the reasons why adoption can fail in so many places, right? Um, Tell me, I know a big part of Scalus is Bella. Tell everybody what is Bella.
Well, Bella is my dog, and so naturally I had to name our AI agent after her. In the prior business, she was littered throughout all of our marketing materials and whatnot. And actually, the cursor on our website was an emoji of her face, just to have some
Really?
fun, keep it a little lighthearted. Um, Now, having named the agent her, though, I literally bring up Bella probably 50 times a day on sales demos. And so she's always just sitting here in the corner looking at me like, what the heck are you
Why
talking
do you
about?
keep saying
Right.
my
I'm
name?
right here. Yeah. But Bella is a recruiting sidekick, basically a recruiting assistant that helps facilitate sourcing, pre-screening, interview scheduling, all the end-to-end sort of steps within the Scaleless platform can either be done completely by Bella autonomously or augmented by her support. Um, and so we launched her earlier this year. The reason why we're able to facilitate so many things with her is because we own the full recruitment lifecycle and have all the data there. So that's how we can do, AI interview note taking plus AI sourcing plus, the AI scheduling, and then all of that data stitches together to be able to provide some chained workflows in the back end. So when a client opens up a job requisition, which they can have Bella help them do, once that job rec gets opened, Bella can actually run the search, create the talent pools, generate the outreach sequences all automatically just in the back end because we already have all the data from the job rec that was created within the Scaleless platform. So we're definitely still in the infancy of all the things she can do, though, because there's just so many opportunities and ways that we can continue to innovate with her. We currently have a 9-page document of every action we'd like her to be able to take over the next 6 to 9 months here. And a lot of it is getting into more predictive and proactive um, analytics and messaging within the system. So right now it's conversational, but the recruiter, chats with Bella versus logging into the system and Bella is chatting with you. And so what I'm most excited for is a lot of the forecasting things that we're working on where you can log into the system and Bella will tell you, hey, Curtis, you need to go source 50 more candidates for this role or you're going to miss your time to fill requirement. Oh, by the way, here's 50 candidates that I already sourced. These are the 10 I'd recommend you pre-screen. Do you want me to reach out to handle scheduling with them? So you can do that right now from the system, but it's not as, proactive and it's not being suggested by her based on the data.
Wow. So, okay, just for folks who are listening, to just maybe let's talk a little bit about how sort of this, how like an agentic recruiter works a little bit. So somebody will go into the platform and engage with this agent, right? To presumably, you know, discuss a little bit about what they need, what they're looking for, right? What all the different things in a particular job, et cetera. What happens next?
Yeah. So once the job is defined, Bella will extract out from that job description your ideal candidate profile. So that'll obviously be based off of skills, but there's other criteria that goes into that, like years of experience, industries worked in, company size, company funding stage, location, average tenure, on and on and on. There's a lot of different criteria that
Is
go
it
into that.
collaborative with the actual person who's setting it up too?
Correct. So you can
I see.
either tweak the filters yourself manually in the drawer, or you can chat with Bella to adjust it up or down. And as it relates to like our outbound sourcing um, offering, it'll actually show you in real time the number of candidates that meet that criteria as you adjust the filters or as you chat back and forth with Bella. And so that sets the ideal candidate profile, which is what powers the AI match score throughout the system. So not only the inbound applicants that you're receiving from job boards into the Scaleless ATS, they'll be provided with a match score, but also all of the outbound source candidates that Scaleless is pulling in from our global database of over 700 million profiles, they're also provided a match score. It's the same model. It's really defined by that ideal candidate profile in the job creation process. But where it really all stitches together is in legacy systems, your outbound sourcing and your ATS are separate. So the
Mhm.
outbound sourcing could have a match model and the ATS could have a match model. With SCALIS, let's say you're sourcing somebody, you source John, it says he's a 90% match score. He makes it into the application flow. You do a quick pre screen call with him, and you actually end up rejecting him. In that rejection flow in the ATS, you're going to provide your rejection reason, a meta list designation if applicable, and then any other additional details and notes. Historically, that feedback would just die in that requisition and
Right.
is purely used for the purposes of reporting and analytics. Within SCALIS, it's not only going to update the match score for all the other applicants in that pipeline, but it's
Oh,
actually
wow.
training the sourcing because clearly that person should not have been a 90% for the sourcing agent if they didn't even make it past the pre-screen process. And so having that close the loop, sourcing and ATS in one place is enabling an environment where there's so much more data that can be leveraged for training. And a lot of this is indirect training. So like the recruiters do not have to go out of their way to take a manual action that they wouldn't have done otherwise in order to train the system. Because every interaction that they take within the platform, every candidate progression, candidate rejection, every scorecard submitted by a hiring manager, every interview conducted, we own and aggregate all of that data internally, and in turn are able to use it to train Bella.
Awesome. That's yeah, incredibly powerful. So what are some of the benefits that you're seeing for organizations using AI in their recruiting and hiring process? Like what are the pros to leveraging tools like, Scaleless? Let's talk about that first.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost is just a cost savings, like right out of the gate, because of the fact that you're consolidating, multiple different functions into one platform. Your, total cost of ownership is going to be lower. Second is ease of use. I mean, you're in one system doing everything versus having 12 different tabs open. And then third is going to be time savings. So think about sourcing. Historically, that would have been done more manually. Within Scaleless, you just open up the job and you can have Bella automatically do the search, actually source the candidates, reach out to them, and get them to apply into the pipeline. So we've cut sourcing time by up to 93% for some organizations because of the fact that they're able to just set and forget it. And then it just sort of trickles on down the way from sourcing to offer letter sign. Even as it relates to inbound applicant review, in legacy systems, you could get thousands of applicants. You're stuck with Boolean searches or going one
Mhm.
by one for each resume to choose who
Yeah.
you want to move forward or not. Within Scaleless, we take the applicant's resume, push it through natural language processing, parse it into a standardized structured Scaleless profile for each of them. So it gives our employers over 50 different data points they can use to segment their inbound applicants beyond just the screening questions that they put into the application flow. So they can filter out everybody who has less than 2 years of average tenure in their past three roles, who doesn't have these four different skill sets, who isn't within a 25-mile radius of a particular zip code, who doesn't have more than 2 years of experience in a particular industry. So that could
Mm.
literally take 1,000 applicants down to 100 in the span of 15 seconds. Then from there, you can look at each of those profiles, leverage the match score to choose which ones you want to go forward with or not. But huge time savings there as well.
Yeah. On the other side of the coin, I mean, there's so many ways in which AI in the hiring process has really come under fire. Wh- What do you what do you see as challenges and maybe potential hurdles in using AI for recruiting and hiring, or even ways that other companies, right? We don't have to name drop or whatnot, are not quite nailing it and possibly creating issues.
Yeah. So two main things there. One is that most of the AI entrants to the recruiting landscape are point solutions. So they just do sourcing, or they just do scheduling, or they just do interview intelligence, which is great for the businesses that are stuck on a longer term contract or aren't ready for a wholesale like infrastructure change. Those solutions can provide them temporary relief to the pain point that they're experiencing with whatever their current legacy ETS provider is. Obviously, at an additional expense, but they're not ready for a full rip and replace to something like Scaleless. The issue with being a point solution is that you lack data and context throughout the rest of the recruitment lifecycle.
Mhm.
So your AI sourcing tools are limited in the training data that they have because they don't have access to anything that happens after that candidate clicks apply.
Yeah.
Same goes for all the other point solutions throughout that process. Um, and so that's where I see long term them running into some potential challenges. Though for us, as an early stage company, our sales cycle is longer than what their cycle is going to be because we're not plugging into what already exists, we're replacing what exists. The other component that I see is there's a lot of hype around AI just like totally taking over everything and
Right. Right.
forced to here's the candidate that is signed. That's never going to happen. One, because of rules and regulations. Two, probably because it shouldn't. And three, we've set up SCALIS in a way that AI is there to support and augment, not replace. So how do we turn one recruiter into three? Or how do we turn one recruiter into five? But as an example, that match score, we don't allow it to be the end all be all decision maker within a process. So like you cannot set up an automated rule where if a candidate falls underneath a certain match score, move them, reject them, or if a candidate goes above a certain match score, approve them. You can bulk select all of the candidates who fall underneath that. The human still has to go in there and take that action because of the rules and regulations around what AI can and cannot do. So this idea that you'll be able to have AI post a job, screen the candidates automatically, and then ultimately choose which one gets hired, I think we're pretty far away from that because of rules and regulations and also the comfortability that legal teams have with what AI can and cannot do within their recruitment process. I mean, especially as you work your way up market, I can't tell you how many times we've been asked if they can use SCALIS, but like without the AI in like more than half of the areas where it could be leveraged to support them because of everything. Yeah.
I do see it making that really significant impact across the entire employee life cycle. Beyond SCALIS, I mean, are there other uses for AI and human resources that you find interesting? Out of curiosity.
I think there's a lot in the admin and like manual root tasks of HR, really just every business aspect in general. So I think of, payroll, tax and reporting and things like that. I also think of post-hire sort of engagement and upskilling opportunities, being able to leverage AI within that. But there's pretty much be hard to find, in my opinion, to find any sort of business function or activity that can't use AI in some way. Whether or not it's truly that impactful or meaningful really depends on what it is. We've definitely seen AI just sort of forced into some places for the sake of having AI, which, long term, first of all, it's pretty expensive, to have AI just littered throughout the entirety of a platform. And so we really like to think about what is truly going to be impactful versus what is more gimmicky. Gimmicky isn't necessarily bad, but when I think of AI, I don't think of AI job description generation. I mean, we do that, but like that's not what I think about when I think of AI. And so I think there needs to be a distinction between, generative AI and everything else.
I think that's a good kind of distinction there. And I mean, it kind of leads me to this question, not to be too cliched, but when I do think about the future of HR, right? I mean, we're kind of here. It's now. If you think about SCALIS maybe and other platforms in this space, frankly, what do you see as the next big thing in HR tech? Is it more use cases for AI? Is it more evolved technologies? Is it something else? Is it policy?
I think policy is starting to catch up. I mean, New York, Colorado, a lot of jurisdictions have started to come out with new rules and regulations. And so we work with a variety of third-party like auditing firms. It's really opening up a new area of opportunity for startups to help with compliance, help with support on that side of things. And I think there's a lot of acquisition happening in the HR landscape as there's a rush to be that all-in-one solution and claim it for whether it's like the enterprise vertical or for high volume recruiting. Unclear who's going to actually sort of end up being that all-in-one choice. I don't think it's going to be just one player. I think there might be a player for, a particular vertical or a player for a particular market segment. But the TAM is just so ginormous that there's a lot of room for everyone. I think the evolution of HR tech is you're going to see a lot of point solutions start to bolt on other features and functionality. Like,
Mm-hmm.
an interview intelligence tool just released AI sourcing as an example. I'm not sure what that's going to look like once it matures, because I don't really see the synergies necessarily between some of the additional features that are getting bolted on. But I saw this firsthand in the Shopify ecosystem about 3 years ago, when you had reviews platforms that grew to like 5, maybe 10 million of ARR, and then they sort of flatlined because there's so much competition. It's just a point solution. If you were to go on the Shopify App Store, I think there's like 700 review tools. So then they added like loyalties and referral. Well, it's like, well, there's already 50 point solutions that do loyalties and referral. Why do you also need loyalties and referral? Is there any benefit to there? And so we started to see a little bit of a desperation from standalone solutions to add on additional product offerings to be able to increase that revenue, to keep justifying the VC valuations and the continual need to fundraise. I think we're going to see more and more of that here. And then also I don't know what the right term would be, but sort of a settling of the funding that happened in that 2020 to 23 period, where you had a couple of these players raise pretty significant rounds at rather generous valuations. And the ripple effects of that have still yet to fully play out. And those will start to materialize over the next 2 to 3 years here.
I mean, I think you're probably right about that. Curious, just to pivot a little bit, off of the technology side, not only is the tech evolving, but the world of work as a whole is evolving. I'm curious, like, do you, in doing what you do, building the, this recruiting platform, this, end to end, right, pre-hire platform, what do you think is going to be important to people in the workforce in the near future, right? You clearly have a pulse on not just those people trying to find candidates, but also the candidates themselves, right? I mean, you do an incredible amount of sourcing. Do you see certain things that are becoming really important to them? Are there any trends that are going to emerge that come to the forefront? I mean, it couldn't, I mean, beyond just the tools we use, but what about where we work, compensation, benefits, culture, engagement, anywhere else you want to examine?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing a return to work more and more. And that even as a means to like combat AI as well. In the
Really?
interview process, it is getting more and more common for there to be fake applicants or AI generated applications. And
Interesting.
really, the 100% foolproof way to solving that is a final in person interview, which we've heard
Right.
from multiple employers at this point as something that they're now requiring as a part of their application process. I think second, there's a shrinking of the level of entry positions that are available in the market because of AI. I think some of it is a little bit of an overcorrection, because I've met numerous companies at this point who, reduce headcount and go more like fractional, or try and hold off on entry level. And then ultimately they go fractional, but then they're asking the fractional for even more support and resources. And so then it ends up like netting out even. But I think there's going to be a demand for alternative forms of like education or upskilling from younger career professionals, because they're not having like, internship programs are getting cut by some organizations. The entry level positions are getting slashed. But it's like, who's going to be doing that middle manager role in 5 or 10 years once this
Yeah.
current cohort ages out, if there's not anybody in that entry level pool getting trained? I think that's going to be pretty interesting as well.
Hmm. What about leaders? I mean, you obviously found success in not only what you're doing right now, but in your prior role. So, in the near future, are there other skills that leaders need to have in order to create an empowered and engaged and satisfied team or workforce? Are there tools that they need to be successful that they need to use to be successful for building and retaining their people?
Yeah, I think if you're remote, it's different than if you're in person.
Mhm.
remote I find to be more challenging. And there's a variety of platforms that have come out over the last 5 years to try and combat that problem, making sure that there's still that connection amongst the team, even if in a remote environment. So that would be my number one focus as a leader of a remote workforce is how are we still creating that authenticity and those relationships? Because if you're not, it's so much easier to not feel like a part of the team and to feel like you're involved with it if you're just sort of signing on. It's totally virtual. You don't have that one-on-one. It's the same way I think about like sales and prospecting. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my close rate on the prospects that I've met in person has to be almost double what it is for the folks
Right.
for. Same
Yeah.
even goes for customer retention. Um, it's just way different if you've met in person. You have that one-to-one relationship. So there's a lot of platforms that have come out that help with that, and I think that would be one of my biggest focuses as a remote leader.
Is your team at Scalus remote?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
remote. About a
Were you
third.
guys remote at your past at the past company too?
No, we evolved into it a little bit, but we grew primarily in like the LA, San Diego area. We were probably 70% in person, 30% remote, maybe
Okay.
80-20. So it was a lot easier to have the relationships and the connections and to feel a part of something when you were, showing up. And you also get a lot of advantages outside of just the day to day work. I mean, the quick drinks after dinner,
Yeah.
or
Right.
events, or just things that aren't going to happen organically if you're not in the office together.
What do you see? Some of these leaders doing. Doing right. The ones that are really nailing it. Like, whether they're working with remote teams or in person. Tell me about some of those things, some of those qualities that they have, and some of the things that they do to really make that team, work like a unit. And then the other side of the coin, what's the quicksand that you see a lot of folks falling into that ultimately, destroys their culture or even potentially their business?
So the best leaders I've seen, and I had to learn this myself at the previous company, was having conversations and asking questions to your direct reports that maybe you would not have thought of otherwise. Like a good example for me was I wanted to take one of my direct reports and increase their level of responsibility and title bump them into a director position versus being an individual contributor. Ended up not working out. Could have been alleviated very easily by just asking them if they wanted, like their career path wise, like did they want to continue being an individual contributor, or were they interested in moving into like into a managerial role?
Hmm.
That would have solved everything because they would have said, "I just want to really be a really great individual contributor." Have those conversations versus making assumptions. And everyone doesn't want to be the CEO. Everyone doesn't want to be the founder of a company. And so what I've started to try and do myself even is get an understanding of both personally and professionally what the goals are of that team member and try and help them map to that and how like Scalus can help support them in achieving those. I think that's really important, and to show that demonstrated interest in the team member's success, both professionally and personally, and then try and mirror that to Scalus is going to produce significantly better results for both not only
Yeah.
the employee but also the company.
Yeah. Any I'm curious, and again, no need to sort of name any names or or companies, but curious if you seen or had experiences with leaders who really just kind of bit it hard and wound up destroying either a company or a culture or something like that, just as a result of their actions or inactions.
Yeah, I think I had internships before I started Electric, which was the previous business, and those internships actually made me want to start Electric because I could clearly see that merit was not like promotions and whatnot were not based on merit or who got a seat at the table and who got to bring ideas was not based on merit. It was based off of who had been there the longest, who had, done all the corporate sort of rigmarole. And that's not always the case though. But I think a lot of those corporate environments are, they just breed uh, lack of accountability and ownership. And, it got to the point where you would bring things forward. And because of the fact that they had been doing something the way they had been doing it for like 30 years, and there wasn't really the desire or this appetite for continual improvement and optimization, which I think is really critical. But two, just not having the ability to make any change or have any impact. You're
Yeah.
just like a cog in the wheel. That's really discouraging and disheartening for somebody, especially like a younger, go getting, new team member that's starting. Why not give them the reins and let them, run with things and take some ownership and prove that they belong versus pigeonholing them into these like very specific set of requirements and basically trying to like turn them into a robot or into AI. Like I always stressed whenever I hired anybody, we're not hiring you to just like check these boxes. If we did, then we would just automate it or have AI do it. We're hiring you and for your ideas and insights and
Right.
setting up ways for people to feel heard. Like we, at the end, had the over 50 team members, and each one every quarter would submit 3 ideas around things that we weren't doing that we should be doing, and then we'd take them. We at the end had 150 in total, and would have like a 45-minute all hands meeting where I'd go through each one and talk about how we were addressing it, how we were addressing it in the future, or why we couldn't address it, or perhaps how we were addressing it in a different way. And some of them were silly, like pay off all of my college debt, which obviously we could not do. But others were really impactful. And then we also didn't have them be anonymous because there's definitely certain things that should be anonymous. But I felt like that was one that definitely should not be because we had created a safe space where people could, voice their opinions. And then that way, when we did take one of those ideas and ran with it, I knew who had brought it forth. And so they could take ownership and accountability of actually seeing that through and letting their vision come forward within how we actually created and deployed whatever it was that they had suggested.
I love that, right? And then obviously they can feel good knowing that their voice was heard. Um, so we talk a lot about aspects of people dynamics that might change, as the business landscape evolves, whether remote or not. How do you see your own work evolving in line with all this? I mean, you already led one company, right? You grew it, you built it, you exited it, you're on to the next one. What does that future look like?
In terms of AI,
Yeah, sort of open ended. How do you see your own work sort of evolving with the changing landscape of work, with your growing remote team, with addressing all these needs in this sort of HR tech space with AI, et cetera?
yeah, I think as a founder, like when you're first starting out, you just have to do everything and everything's going to get done, but there's certain things that'll get done, probably not as well as they should. You're just checking the boxes because they have to be done by somebody, but there's only so much time in the day. And so as we continue to grow, choosing what and how to delegate is really important. And then certain things that didn't matter so much when you're 10, 20 people will matter a lot more when you're 50 people. And the one offs that you can handle with a team of 10 at 50, those one offs start to add up. And so making sure that you have SOPs and procedures and processes in place to help facilitate those is really important. So
Yeah.
that's my main focus as we continue to grow is making sure that some of these things don't fall to the wayside as I pick up new and different responsibilities, having lanes in place to either delegate or make sure that I'm owning them fully is important and
Nice.
making sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So as I've learned is I'm very focused on go to market and sales and events and whatnot and building and like creating community, not only externally, but within the organization itself. But when it comes to like, I don't know, bookkeeping, payroll, some of these other stuff that I would have to do myself in the beginning, like
All the HR stuff.
pretty much. Aside from recruiting, because now I can just use SCALIS to recruit, and it's so easy. But
There you go.
yeah, you win.
One last question. I'm always curious. If you're with an entrepreneur asking you for your single most important piece of advice about identifying the right talent or building a team, I'm sure you have these conversations all the time. Maybe you're on an elevator up to the top floor and they're really looking for that one piece of advice so they can nail it the first time around. What is it that you tell them?
Yeah, the number one thing would be delegation. So one of the things that I did with the previous company, I took a month and wrote down every single thing that I did that month, how much time it took, and then looked back at it after that month and went through it and was basically like, okay, what's the level of importance here? And what's the level of effort to execute against that? And then sort of a third column, which was, do I like this or not? Which is important because, certain things I didn't like, but I had to keep doing because the level of importance was really high. And it really could only be done by me at that point. Other things, I didn't like and level of importance was low. And so you obviously could offload those. But basically took that matrix and then determined, okay, these are the things that I must own and will continue to own. These are the things that I don't need to own forever, but I'll still own for now. But let me make sure that I'm setting up and documenting processes so that I will have the ability to train somebody else to do it. And then here's all the things that I can go delegate now. And is it somebody internally that I can delegate to, or is it somebody externally? And then the second follow on to that would be just have those conversations, like I mentioned earlier in this interview or in this podcast, is talking with that team member and making sure that they actually want to do whatever it is that you're thinking of looping them in for. And I'm very much so a proponent of like autonomy and delivering goals to an employee versus delivering tasks. Like, I don't care what the actual tasks are that get done to achieve the goal. And so I'm here to support the team member in identifying what those tasks could or should be to achieve that goal. But I'm not here saying, oh, you need to do 100 of this every week. It's more so, this is where we're trying to get to. Let's, create and ideate to getting to that stage. And that just builds even more autonomy and buy-in from the team member that they're working with. So I think that's just the number one thing. I mean, you're only going to, in order to be a successful entrepreneur that's not a solopreneur, you're going to have to be able to lift up your team and they'll lift you up as well.
Right. So I love all of those things, by the way, but learn to delegate, talk to your team, and focus on outcomes.
Yep. And
I like it.
Above all, be all, have your end goal in mind. Like, why the hell are you even doing this to begin with?
Your why, I guess.
Shaped why and how I built electric and why I sold it. And that's also shaping, why and how I built SCALIS and why I would not sell it. I mean, definitely not at this point, but like, I think even having that in mind is important when you're thinking about how you build.
Yeah, I mean, definitely 100%. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Brandon. Listen, I really appreciate it. I think we got a lot of great stuff out of this. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you all for tuning into MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Please like and share this episode. Drop by mustardhub.com to learn how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. And be sure to sign up to be one of the first to get started with MustardHub for free when you visit the site. Until next time.